Hi class, in this video, I'm going to go over our topic 1 assignment titled Learning Objectives and Lesson Alignment. In this assignment, you're going to be demonstrating your knowledge of taking a standard from your state standards and breaking it down into a daily learning objective. Then you'll be looking at a lesson plan and looking for a lesson to see if it's aligned to its standard. So let's go ahead and jump in to what this assignment should look like. First, you'll find over here to the right, you have your learning objective table in which you'll complete your assignment on. You'll want to go ahead and open up that assignment, and it looks like this. You'll notice that it has a math standard that you're supposed to find. And then you take that standard and you'll be looking at what it means, why it's important, and how students can demonstrate their knowledge around that standard. You'll do this again for English Language Arts standard. So you get practice doing it in 2 content areas. So let's go ahead and jump into our standards. So you want to go to your state department website and find your state standards. These are all of the things that teachers will be teaching in any given grade levels. Standards are not to be modified or changed in any way. Teachers need to copy them and use them word for word. Make sure that you see my lectures on standards and understanding the coding of standards so you are ready when you start this assignment. All right, so here I am on the Arizona web page because that's the state I'm in, and I'm going to go to our academic standards. I'm going to start by finding a math standard. So here I am on my math page. And I'm going to go for K5, and I'll open up a 3rd grade standards document. So here I am with my 3rd grade standards. We have some front matter that gives me the overviews. And then here I am at this standards level. When I look at this document, as I showed in my lectures, there's several parts to standards. And over here, this part where you see 30A1, that coding is described in my lectures, but this is not a standard. This is what I call a domain. Over here, where they end in numbers, these are my standards. And so this is what I'm looking for, is these standards. When I take that standard, I'm going to take both the coding and the description of the standard. You don't ever need to cite your standards like a scholarly resource on your lesson plans or any of your assignments. I would like all citations to be around the content and activities and things like that when you're required to cite your references. So let's go ahead and choose a standard we want to use to deconstruct. I'm going to choose a standard that I like because I might be using this standard throughout the entirety of this course. So I'm going to make sure to choose something I feel comfortable with writing a lesson plan around by the end of the course. Let's see. I think I like some geometry standards. So I'm going to go down to measurement or geometry. Yeah, let me do measurement standards. And I am going to take this, let's see, area here, 3MDC5. So I'm going to copy that and bring that right over to my assignment. If it will let me. Let me try this. And over to my assignment, I'm going to include both the standard coding, then I have to put a colon after that, and the standard description. It's important you have both. Without the description, it's hard for me to know what it says, and then I end up having to go search it. But you, as the teacher, more importantly, need that wording there so you know what you're expected to teach. Now that I've identified my standard, I need to read it and then consider these questions before I write my objective. Now, if you haven't watched the lecture on how to write objectives that I posted in the announcement, this is also a really great tool to help you understand objective writing. It is a art and it takes many, many years of practice to get good at writing objectives. So watching others and hearing more explanations will really help you. Okay, so let's go ahead and read that standard. So third graders are having to understand area as an attribute of plane figures and understand concepts of area measurement. So then the standard has a couple of letters. We've got A and then we have B. So these are even further explaining what they should do around area. So one, they need to understand a square with a side length of 1 unit is called a unit square, is said to have 1 square unit of area that can be used to measure an area. So when we think about area, we don't just call them like 1 or 1 inch or 1 foot. We have to think of them as square units because when we do area, we have both our length and our width, which ends up creating squares. So that's what that first part says. And then B says a plane figure which can be covered without gaps or overlaps by n square unit is said to have an area of n square units. Sometimes these standards are a little confusing, especially when they use letters. So sometimes to help me understand it, I'll change those letters to a number to give me an idea of what it's saying, and I read it again. A plane figure which can be covered without gaps or overlaps by 5 square units is said to have an area of 5 square units. Okay, that helps me understand it better. So when I think about the standards, what do my students need to know? Well, they need to know that area is a measurement concept. What else do they need to know? They need to know that we measure area using square units. If I was to say the area of my room is 1 foot, that wouldn't make sense because a foot by itself is just length. I need to have the other dimension of width. So when I say 1 square foot, that indicates both length and width are 1 foot, or they equal together 1 foot. So we measure area using square units. And then area measurement should not have gaps or overlaps. In other words, when students first start exploring the concept of area, they explore using hands-on materials like square tiles. Give them a rectangle, they cover the square tiles on that rectangle and count how many tiles it took to fill the rectangle before they move into formulas. And so they need to understand to be precise, should not have gaps or overlaps when covering a plane figure. You have to be very precise. All right, so we measure area using square units. Area is a concept of measurement. Area measurement should not have over gaps or overlaps. Okay, so why is this important? Well, we use area in real life all the time. Real life. And then I might give some examples like I carpet or tile a room, or I need grass for my yard, or I need to find the area for a space or an area for clothes I'm making, how much fabric I need to buy. So we use area in real life all of the time. And so that's the why it's important in math. It is also a form of measurement, and I think that is important as well. Okay, now how will students demonstrate their knowledge? So when I read this, I see a lot of talking about um, area and having square units and having a plane figure covered with unit squares. So for me, I can see this as them demonstrating their learning by covering a plane figure with square units. Um, this would be a way in which they can demonstrate their knowledge. And I might tighten these up by refining my language as I go, but I just want to give you a quick example. So now it's time for me to write my learning objective. The difference between a standard and an objective is a standard often contains a lot of concepts that may take several days or weeks to teach. Some even take the full year to get to the full standard, especially in mathematics. So the objective is just what are they learning on that one day? The objective is for your lesson plan for that one day, what are you going to focus on? So it often is not a long paragraph. It is a concise sentence that states what they're going to learn for the day. So if my goal is students will understand area, that's really great. It's a goal, but understand is hard to measure. We want to write an objective in which we can observe it and see if kids can do this by the end of our lesson. So let me give you an example. Typically, we start with students will, or students will be able to. Then there's a strong verb right here. Strong, observable verb. That's what I mean by strong. I can see it happening. I can go, oh yes. Understand is something I cannot see happening. But if they can, let's see, determine the area of a plane figure using tile squares. There we go. So now that I have determined the area, that would be what they're doing. They're determining the area of a plane figure using square tiles and representing or expressing the area of the figure in square units. So in other words, if I give students a plane figure, such as a rectangle, they would put the square tiles over it, and then they would say how many there are with no gaps or overlaps, and then they might say it is 15 square units. So I want to make sure that they're both determining the area and then expressing it correctly. So now I have a math objective. It's measurable. It's aligned to my standard. And I would be ready to now start a lesson plan from my objective. You want to do the same thing with the English language arts objective. So you'll go back to your State Department website and find your standards for language arts. And I'll stay in the third grade realm here. With these standards, you're going to have several areas, which include reading and literature, reading information, reading foundation, which is such as our phonics and our words and how they come together. You'll have writing. And then this state, we have some writing foundation. So that includes some cursive. And then there's speaking and listening, and then language, which is our grammar. You can choose from any of these areas It's up to you what you would choose for that standard. But again, choose something that you would like to write a full lesson on. I would probably maybe stay away from the reading foundations because that can be really open-ended. And for your first time of deconstructing standards, you might want to have something more specific. So let's go ahead and go into the reading information and or literature standards. So looking at my coding, RL is my reading literature and RI is my reading for information. I'm just going to go ahead and take this one, 3 RI2. And I'm going to go through that same process that I just went through. Okay, determine the main idea. And I would look at all of those things I just showed you, which is what am I doing? What do the students need to know? Why do they need to know it? And how they demonstrate their knowledge. And then you'll write your language arts objective. So this is how to do part 1. I'm not going to take you through a second standard, but feel free to watch all of the lectures and other resources I gave that show me deconstructing standards and writing objectives. There's a lot of great resources for this. Now let's talk about part 2. Part 2 says that you need to research and identify a lesson plan that includes a standard and learning objective. So you just need to find a lesson plan from any resource. It doesn't matter which one. I recommend when doing a Google search, do not do a vague or general Google search. I would do something as far as a standard goes. Google search a standard and then lesson plans, because if you just type in math lesson plans or 3rd grade lesson plans, you tend to not get great results. But when you search by a standard, you tend to get much better results. Let me show you. So if I researched this standard I did for math, I could put lesson plan. And I get really specific lesson plans. If you do use this website, education.com, please include that lesson plan in your submission of your assignment. I do not have any more licenses to this. A lot of students use it because it's the first thing that comes up, and I'm not going to pay for this. But make sure what you find is a lesson plan, because when I'm looking at this, look, these are all worksheets. I'm looking for a lesson plan. There we go. There's a lesson plan. You are more than welcome to use this, but when I click download lesson plan, it's going to make me log in and I don't have any more free ones. So you have to share it with me or I cannot see it. But this is not the only site you can get a lesson plan from. There are plenty of sites where you can get lesson plans. Better Lesson is a wonderful place. There's Share My Lesson. There's a lot of results. So avoidingeducation.com unless you download it and submit it with your assignment. So once you find a lesson plan, let me go to somewhere where I can actually see one. Better Lesson doesn't make me sign up. So, okay, here, this one is aligned. It's got an objective. Let's make sure it has a standard like the thing to ask for. They do see some standards tagged over here, MDC5, MDC6, MDC7. So I do see my standards are tagged, so this will work. All right. Students will be able to apply their measurement and area strategies to figure out how much paint will be needed to cover the surface of bat houses. So now I'm going to read through this lesson and make sure that everything they do in this lesson is aligned to those standards and that objective. You're really looking at analyzing this. So you're going to answer these questions in 250 to 500 words. I don't mind if you go over, but I prefer detail and explicit examples. So is the lesson aligned to the standard? So don't just say yes. explain why. So you'll notice in the mini lesson part, they, talked about the problem in discussion of area, which is directly aligned to the standard because the standard is all about area. Then I keep going and I'll explain, okay, next, they are struggling to find out the area of a triangle board. And so they begin to find the rules of area. This is all connected to those standards. And so give me those specific examples as you do this. And then you keep going through the 4 questions or the rest of the 4 questions. Does the learning objective state what students need to know and or do because of this instruction? Yes, give specific examples. Is the content of the lesson aligned to that objective? So are what they're teaching, is that the same thing? Yes, and explain why. And what changes or revisions might you make to ensure its alignment to the standard and the learning objective? So you can add in more items. Maybe you might say, maybe they needed to get out the square tiles and tile those triangles to figure out how many, what the area was, or you might give some recommendations to expand if it already is well aligned. Now, when you think about all of these things, it seems pretty simple. Well, that was really well aligned. What I often see is some standards that are, especially in your kindergarten standards, we can often mix things up. So let me give you a quick example of that. And by opening up the kindergarten standards and showing you an example, because I know I see it a lot in this one, in the kindergarten. It sounds like it's aligned, but then when you look at the verbs, it's not aligned. So for example, I often see a lesson plan that has students writing their numbers, and they're counting and they're writing and they're doing, several things. And the teacher has them counting up, asking how many objects there are, but they just put this one standard, KCCA1, count to 100 by tens and ones. Well, while that sounds like it's pretty well aligned, when you ask them to write standards, you now need, or write numbers, you now need this standard as well. And when you ask them to count objects, you now need one of these standards down here too, count to answer questions about how many. Kindergarten and many of the standards can be a little overlap between them. And so if multiple things are happening, you want to mark each of these standards, especially because a whole lesson on just counting isn't typical, but you might count actual objects. So you would tag several of these standards. Make sure when you're looking at your standards, look at those verbs. If I picked this standard, this is all about writing numbers. So they can represent a number of objects with a written numeral. So this one, the focus of the lesson would be on the writing. If the focus of the lesson is not on the actual letter formation, but rather counting how many, I would use this standard as my main standard. So look for those discrepancies as you're analyzing the lesson plan that you choose. You'll just take those 4 questions and then you will answer them. You do not need to cite any sources on this, but I do want to see solid academic writing, complete sentences. In my example, I was going a little fast, so I'd probably go up here and refine my writing to make sure that it's in complete sentences and well written. And then on part 2, it's open. You just need to write your summary. You can include the questions there and answer them, or you can write it in more paragraph form. Let me know if you have any questions.